Chapter 27 of the Beetle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Beetle by Richard Marsh. Chapter 27. The Terror by Night. When I left Papa, or rather when Papa had driven me from him, I went straight to the man whom I had found in the street. It was late, and I was feeling both tired and worried, so that I only thought of seeing for myself how he was. In some way he seemed to be a link between Paul and myself, and as, at that moment, links of that kind were precious, I could not have gone to bed without learning something of his condition. The nurse received me at the door. "Well, nurse, how's the patient?" Nurse was a plump, motherly woman, who had attended more than one odd protégé of mine, and whom I kept pretty constantly at my beck and call. She held out her hands.
"It's hard to tell. He hasn't moved since I came."
"Not moved? Is he still insensible?"
"He seems to me to be in some sort of trance. He does not appear to breathe, and I can detect no pulsation, but the doctor says he's still alive. It's the queerest case I ever saw."
I went farther into the room. Directly I did so, the man in the bed gave signs of life, which were sufficiently unmistakable. Nurse hastened to him.
"Why," she exclaimed, "he's moving! He might have heard you enter."
He not only might have done, but it seemed possible that that was what he actually had done. As I approached the bed, he raised himself to a sitting posture, as, in the morning, he had done in the street, and he exclaimed, as if he addressed himself to some one whom he saw in front of him. I cannot describe the almost more than human agony which was in his voice.
"Paul Lessingham! Beware! The Beetle!"
What he meant I had not the slightest notion. Probably that was why what seemed more like a pronouncement of delirium than anything else had such an extraordinary effect upon my nerves. No sooner had he spoken than a sort of blank horror seemed to settle down upon my mind. I actually found myself trembling at the knees. I felt, all at once, as if I was standing in the immediate presence of something awful, yet unseen. As for the speaker, no sooner were the words out of his lips than, as was the case in the morning, he relapsed into a condition of trance. Nurse, bending over him, announced the fact.
"He's gone off again. What an extraordinary thing! I suppose it is real."
It was clear, from the tone of her voice, that she shared the doubt which had troubled the policeman.
"There's not a trace of a pulse. From the look of things he might be dead. Of one thing I'm sure, that there's something unnatural about the man. No natural illness I ever heard of takes hold of a man like this."
Glancing up, she saw that there was something unusual in my face, an appearance which startled her.
"Why, Miss Marjorie, what's the matter? You look quite ill."
I felt ill, and worse than ill, but at the same time I was quite incapable of describing what I felt to nurse. For some inscrutable reason I had even lost the control of my tongue. I stammered, I'm not feeling very well, nurse. I think I'll be better in bed." As I spoke, I staggered towards the door, conscious all the while that nurse was staring at me with eyes wide open. When I got out of the room, it seemed, in some incomprehensible fashion, as if something had left it with me, and that it and I were alone together in the corridor. So overcome was I by the consciousness of its immediate propinquity, that all at once I found myself cowering against the wall, as if I expected something or someone to strike me. How I reached my bedroom I do not know. I found Fanchette awaiting me. For the moment her presence was a positive comfort, until I realised the amazement with which she was regarding me. "Mademoiselle is not well?" "Thank you, Fanchette. I am rather tired. I will undress myself to-night. You can go to bed." "But if mademoiselle is so tired, will she not permit me to assist her?" The suggestion was reasonable enough, and kindly too, for, to say the least of it, she had as much cause for fatigue as I had. I hesitated. I should have liked to throw my arms about her neck and beg her not to leave me; but the plain truth is, I was ashamed. In my inner consciousness, I was persuaded that the sense of terror which had suddenly come over me was so absolutely causeless that I could not bear the notion of playing the craven in my maid's eyes. While I hesitated, something seemed to sweep past me through the air, and to brush against my cheek in passing. I caught at Fanchette's arm. "Fanchette, is there something with us in the room?" "Something with us in the room? Mademoiselle? What does mademoiselle mean?" She looked disturbed, which was, on the whole, excusable. Fanchette is not exactly a strong-minded person, and not likely to be much of a support when a support was most required. If I was going to play the fool, I would be my own audience; so I sent her off. "Did you not hear me tell you that I will undress myself? You're to go to bed." She went to bed, with quite sufficient willingness. The instant that she was out of the room, I wished that she was back again. Such a paroxysm of fear came over me that I was incapable of stirring from the spot on which I stood, and it was all I could do to prevent myself from collapsing in heap on the floor. I had never, till then, had reason to suppose that I was a coward, nor to suspect myself of being the possessor of nerves. I was as little likely as any one to be frightened by shadows. I told myself that the whole thing was sheer absurdity, and that I should be thoroughly ashamed of my own conduct when the morning came. If you don't want to be self-branded as a contemptible idiot, Marjorie Lindon, you will call up your courage, and these foolish fears will fly. But it would not do. Instead of flying, they grew worse. I became convinced, and the process of conviction was terrible beyond words, that there actually was something with me in the room, some invisible horror, which at any moment might become visible. I seemed to understand, with a sense of agony which nothing can describe, that this thing which was with me was with Paul, that we were linked together by the bond of a common and a dreadful terror; that, at that moment, that same awful peril which was threatening me was threatening him, and that I was powerless to move a finger in his aid. As with a sort of second sight, I saw out of the room in which I was into another in which Paul was crouching on the floor, covering his face with his hands, and shrieking. The vision came again and again, with a degree of vividness of which I cannot give the least conception. At last the horror and the reality of it goaded me to frenzy. "Paul! Paul!" I screamed. As soon as I found my voice, the vision faded. Once more I understood that, as a matter of simple fact, I was standing in my own bedroom, that the lights were burning brightly, that I had not yet commenced to remove a particle of dress. Am I going mad? I wondered. I had heard of insanity taking extraordinary forms, but what could have caused softening of the brain in me I had not the faintest notion. Surely that sort of thing does not come on one in such a wholly unmitigated